Hey history enthusiasts, in today's immersive journey we're stepping into the damp chill of a northern autumn, September 1941, when the trees along the Neva River first began turning yellow. The air carries scents of wet foliage and distant wood smoke, but there's a sharper edge beneath: oil, cold metal, and that unmistakable river chill that makes you instinctively raise your collar. You're marching with Army Group North, having advanced relentlessly across the Baltic like some slow but unstoppable storm front. On paper, the objective seems simple: tighten the noose around Leningrad. The brutal reality? You'll likely never make it out alive. Before you drift off to sleep tonight, feel free to hit like and subscribe, but only if these deep dives into World War II's forgotten corners resonate with you. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from and what time it is there. It still amazes me how far these gritty, dust-covered stories can travel across time and space. Now settle in. Let your breathing slow. We're stepping through time's curtain. No headlines here, just the quiet, defining moments that shaped a generation. The Neva's surface glints dully like a tarnished blade in the weak sunlight as your boots sink into churned mud along the bank. The mist hangs so thick it turns even the nearby shoreline into a ghostly silhouette. Behind you, half-track engines sputter and settle as mechanics fuss over fuel lines that aren't frozen yet, but will be soon. Upstream, engineers have thrown a pontoon bridge across the sluggish current, its narrow walkway already slick with morning frost. You fall into line with your platoon, rifle slung, your bread bag and mess tin knocking rhythmically against your hip with each step. The 58th Infantry Division has been pushing northeast for days now, probing for weaknesses, advancing across terrain that would have seemed impossible to take mere months ago. In the distance, the low sprawl of NGA appears through the haze, its church spire just visible. The name means nothing yet, but soon it will. It's one of the last rail junctions still feeding Leningrad from the east. Staff officers discuss decisive objectives in the same tone men use for grocery lists, but you sense the importance in how your company commander keeps checking his watch, constantly urging the column forward. Crossing the Neva isn't just about movement, it's symbolic warfare. Somewhere on the far bank, Soviet units are retreating toward the city, leaving behind scorched barns and booby-trapped crossroads. Your boots hit the pontoon planks with hollow thuds. The current gurgles softly beneath your feet, and for a moment you let your gaze drift to the sluggish water sliding past. There's an old superstition among the ranks about rivers. Cross them too late in the year, and they'll remember your name when they freeze over. You quickly look ahead again. Halfway across, a distant rumble echoes down the river like lazy drumbeats. The man ahead mutters something about artillery, but the sound's too low and regular. More like unseen freight, trains moving somewhere beyond the mist. You've learned that in this part of the world, not all thunder comes from the sky. On the opposite shore, the ground's uneven, churned by wheels and hooves. You pick your way past the remains of a hastily abandoned Soviet position. Shallow trenches lined with frozen turf, boot prints still pressed into the mud. A dented mess tin lies half buried at your feet, crushed as if someone stomped on it during their retreat. One man's hurried escape, another's swift arrival. Your company moves into a thin birch grove where the white trunks stripe the fog like prison bars. Here, the pace slows. A motorcycle dispatch rider splashes past, lifting his goggles to shout something at your sergeant before roaring away. The words don't quite carry, but the sergeant's clenched jaw tells you everything. The front's closer than anyone thought. You pause in a shallow depression that smells faintly of peat. The men around you adjust straps, sip from canteens. One soldier gnaws at a biscuit corner like it's a gourmet meal. You fish out a small notebook from your tunic, a half-written letter to someone back home. Sentences trailing off where words failed you. It's not that you've run out of things to say. There's too much, most of which would never pass the censors anyway. Overhead, the sky wears that washed-out blue-gray unique to Baltic autumns. Somewhere above the mist, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane drones lazily. You imagine the view from up there, the Neva bending like a steel ribbon, forests patched with fall colors, and far to the west, the pale shimmer of Lake Ladoga. From that height, the besieged city must look deceptively peaceful. As the day wears on, you're pushed forward again toward a rise overlooking the river's eastern bends. The terrain deceives. Open patches that seem harmless until you remember they're well within range of Soviet artillery positioned in the city's outskirts. The order comes to spread out, and you find yourself walking parallel to men you barely know, keeping just enough distance so one shell won't take you all out together. Your breath clouds in the cooling air as the sun dips lower. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoes, sharp, almost defiant. Later you'll hear it was one of the last trains evacuating people from Leningrad before the ring closed. For now, it's just another note in the front's strange, discordant symphony. When you finally stop for the night, it's in a shallow hollow screened by fir trees. The company cook, really just a guy with a battered field stove, doles out ladles of something brown and steaming. You take yours gratefully, balancing the hot tin between your hands. Around you, men speak in low voices about the day's march, how far the Finns have advanced from the north, how soon the city might fall. No one voices what everyone's thinking, that sieges, like rivers, have a way of holding on to you longer than you'd planned. As darkness settles, you roll into your blanket, damp earth leaching cold through the fabric. Somewhere by the river, a sentry coughs, the sound drifting upslope like a reminder. The Neva flows on, indifferent, carrying leaves and driftwood past the pontoon bridge you crossed this morning. You close your eyes, trying not to think about what tomorrow will demand, or how many more crossings, of rivers, of seasons, await before this ends. The morning mist clings stubbornly to the marshes, beating your greatcoat with icy droplets before you've even finished your first bitter sip of coffee. The fire you're crouched beside produces more smoke than warmth, the damp birch logs hissing like they resent being burned. Beyond the thin tree line ahead lies the objective. Link up with Finnish forces pressing down from the north, close the remaining gaps, and seal Leningrad shut. You've heard this directive repeated so often in the past week it started sounding like a grim hymn, one you're expected to recite perfectly without missing a single word. The officers claim the city's already halfway starved, its factories running on fumes, its bread rations reduced to crumbs. What they don't say aloud, but what every man in your platoon has deduced, is that this won't be a quick siege. You've seen enough of the Red Army in retreat to know they'll fight with stubborn, almost insane determination, and Leningrad isn't just any city. It's Petrograd. It's the cradle of the October Revolution. Whatever else history decides about this war, neither side will ever forget that. You shoulder your rifle and join the column moving through the sodden fields east of MGA. The mud sucks greedily at your boots, as if the very earth wants to anchor you here. Somewhere to the left, the Fokhof River glints dully through the trees, flowing north toward Lake Ladoga. Its current seems lazy now, but locals tell stories of its spring floods, how meltwater transforms it into a raging beast that sweeps away anything foolish enough to linger near its banks. You file this away as another warning. In this country, even the landscape fights against you. The linking of forces happens in fragments, not the grand cinematic moment you might have imagined. One of your patrols stumbles upon a Finnish ski detachment at the edge of a birchwood, lean, wiry men with pale eyes and rifles slung low across their chests. They're polite but curt. They're German, just passable enough for exchanging handshakes and cigarettes. You've been told the Finns will stop at the old Tsarist border, leaving your forces to close the southern arc of the siege. Why? That's for higher ranks to debate. You suspect it's politics, and politics, you've learned, can be deadlier than any machine gun nest. By midday, you're trudging along the last rail spur out of the city, its damp wooden ties slick underfoot. The engineers have been busy here. Charges placed, rails twisted, signaling masts toppled like felled trees. Somewhere ahead, a Soviet locomotive lies tilted in a ditch, its smokestack snapped clean off, already beginning its slow transformation into a rusted relic. You pass it without comment. Here, machines wear out as quickly as the men who operate them. The tightening of the siege ring isn't just about troop movements. It's about severing lifelines. Staff officers back at headquarters discuss supply in sterile terms: tonnage, capacity, throughput. Out here, it's the brutal arithmetic of starvation. You see it in the abandoned carts along the roadside, in the scattered household goods spilling from broken crates. You see it in the wary glances of villagers peeking through shuttered windows as you pass. They know what happens when a city gets cut off. Many lived through it before. Late in the day, your company reaches a low ridge overlooking the Neva's bend near Schlüsselburg. The westward view stuns you. The faint silhouette of the city's skyline, the glint of its spires catching the late sun. For a breath, you could almost believe you're looking at a picturesque postcard. Then the rumble of artillery from the far bank shatters the illusion. The Red Army still holds the western shore, and they've no intention of surrendering it without dragging you through hell first. You dig in along the ridge, your shovel biting reluctantly into the wet soil. Around you, men work in near silence, only the occasional grunt interrupting the steady scrape and toss rhythm of earth moving. There's a quiet understanding here. Once the ring closes, this line will become home for longer than anyone wants to admit. You line your shallow foxhole with spruce boughs to keep your gear somewhat dry. It's a small comfort, but in this place, you take what you can get. Evening comes early in these northern latitudes. By the time you receive your bread ration and ersatz coffee, the sky has already deepened to violet. Somewhere behind the lines, a company gramophone plays a tinny waltz, the notes drifting up the slope like ghosts from a world untouched by war. You lean back, sip the bitter brew, and watch your breath curl away into the gathering dark. Around the campfires, conversation turns to the city itself. Some men fantasize about the prize, a triumphant march down Nevsky Prospect, their iron crosses gleaming in the autumn sun. Others, more pragmatic, envision only the long winter ahead, endless century shifts, the cold creeping into their bones. You keep your thoughts to yourself. Historians still argue whether by late September the city's fate was already sealed, or whether its defenders' resilience and the trickle of supplies across Lake Ladoga offered real hope. You've heard both versions, but neither changes your orders. Hold the ring tight. Let nothing in, let nothing out. In the last hour before lights out, a runner arrives from battalion with news. The northern link-up is complete. The siege is, for all practical purposes, sealed. The Finns have dug in along their line, content to wait. Your regiment will establish a defensive arc stretching from the Neva southward to the swamps beyond MGA. That's where you'll spend the foreseeable future. You crawl into your bedroll with that thought heavy in your mind. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke, the distant thunder of the city's artillery like a slow, relentless heartbeat. Somewhere in that gray mass of streets and canals, people are wondering how long they can last. Out here, you're wondering the same thing, just from the other side of the wire. The first real cold creeps in without fanfare. One morning you wake to find shallow roadside pools glazed with ice, delicate as spun sugar. When your boot heel shatters one, the cracking sound carries through the still air like breaking glass in an empty house. You tug your scarf higher, tucking it beneath your helmet strap. The damp earth beneath your greatcoat has stiffened, giving the ground an odd springiness when you shift your weight. Somewhere to the east, along the Fokhof front, the Red Army is regrouping. You can sense it in the air before you see any signs. The Fokhof here isn't particularly wide, but its current moves with stubborn determination, carrying brown autumn leaves north toward Lake Ladoga. The 18th Army's line runs roughly parallel, a patchwork of rifle pits, dugouts, and log-reinforced shelters. Your section's been rotated into a forward position not far from Tikhvin's approaches. The locals pronounce the town's name like it's some ancient proverb, as if the syllables themselves should convey meaning. You'll discover why soon enough. Tikhvin itself isn't much to look at, a scattering of low houses, a church dome barely visible above the tree line. But it's a crucial railway junction. Hold it, and you choke another artery feeding Leningrad from the east. Lose it, and the Soviets regain breathing room. The maps at headquarters have thick red pencil circles around it, like someone marking a winning lottery number. The message is clear. Whatever else happens, defend that pencil mark at all costs. Your days settle into a rhythm that's equal parts monotonous and nerve-wracking. At dawn, You check frost accumulation on your rifle barrel before sighting toward the misty horizon. By mid-morning, the fog thins, revealing the muted colors of surrounding marshland. Ochres, browns, the stubborn white of early snow clinging to shaded gullies. You share a canteen of tepid water with the man beside you, exchanging meaningless chatter, bread rations, rumors of mail from home, the ever-present question of whether the Soviets will strike your sector next. The first probing attack comes on a Tuesday, though the days have already begun blurring together. It starts with distant artillery thumps you almost convince yourself are just practice fire. Then the sound swells into overlapping waves rolling across the river. You hunker in your shallow trench, helmet low, listening to shells pass overhead. They're not aimed directly at you, not yet, but each one feels close enough to make your breath hitch. When the shelling tapers off, the air fills with the thin whine of engines. Peering over your pit's edge, you catch movement in the distant tree line across the marsh. At first, just shapes, then the telltale glint of bayonets catching stray sunlight. The Soviets advance in small groups, testing the ground, hunting for soft spots. Your section responds with controlled bursts. The rifles recoil a familiar jolt against your shoulder. Across no man's land, the figures melt back into the trees as suddenly as they appeared. A feint, then. The real assault will come later. That night, the cold sinks deeper into your bones. You wake repeatedly to stamp feeling back into your feet, the icy air knifing through your boots. One squad mate lines his socks with newspaper, a trick he claims to have learned from a Finnish soldier. You try it next day, and while it's no miracle, it helps. Out here, any improvement counts. Days later, word filters down. The Soviets have launched a major push to retake Tikhvin. Increased traffic on the supply road behind you confirms it. Trucks groaning under ammunition loads, carts piled high with crates. The battalion runner brings orders for all available men to prepare for redeployment. You shoulder your pack and join the column marching toward the town. The journey proves grueling. The road alternates between churned mud and frozen ruts sharp enough to rattle your teeth. Frost edges the marshes, and the sun, when it bothers to appear, hangs low and pale, conserving its energy. You pass a burnt-out field kitchen by the roadside, its chimney bent like a broken finger. Someone's chalked a joke on its side in crude handwriting. You can't tell if it's meant to be funny or bitter, but you smile anyway. By the time you reach Tikhvin's outskirts, sporadic gunfire fills the air. The streets stand empty except for stray dogs nosing through drifts of ash and frost. The church dome you'd glimpsed earlier shows pockmarks and blackening, its gilding dulled to tired bronze. You're directed to a defensive position on the town's eastern side, overlooking frozen marshes that serve as the Soviet approach route. From here, you spot faint sled tracks disappearing into the trees, proof that movement continues despite the cold. Historians still debate whether the Tikhvin offensive was a desperate Soviet gamble or calculated step in a larger plan to break the siege. The truth? Depends who you ask. All you know is this fighting will determine whether the noose around Leningrad holds or loosens enough for supplies to slip through. The first major assault hits at dawn. You're jolted awake by incoming fire's whistle, then the concussive blasts as shells burst in nearby fields. Snow-dusted figures emerge from the tree line, advancing in short rushes between cover. The freezing air stings your face. Your fingers stiffen on the rifle stock. The man beside you mutters about ghosts. You nod. In this pale light, they do look spectral, gray, insubstantial, yet relentless. The day wears on in violent bursts separated by uneasy silences. At one point you spot a Soviet banner fluttering above marsh grass, only to vanish moments later. Your section holds position, though by nightfall enemy lines have crept alarmingly close. When stand-down orders finally come, you collapse against the frozen embankment, exhaustion weighing heavier than your gear. That night, an unnatural quiet settles over the town. Even the dogs have stopped roaming. You sit with your back against a wall still faintly warm from daytime sun, sipping tin-tasting water from your canteen. Somewhere in the darkness, a sentry's call carries across frost-stilled streets. The siege ring holds, for now, but you've seen enough to know the challenge won't end here. You feel it in your gut before the quartermaster even speaks. His voice is flat, matter of fact, the bread rations being cut again. No one asks why. Everyone already knows. The supply columns from the rear have been thinning for weeks, and when they do arrive, the crates seem half empty before they're even opened. Somewhere along the chain, lost in the swamps, or maybe just the paperwork, your dinner disappears. It's a strange irony. You're here to starve out the city, but the siege is already reaching back toward you. It's not dramatic. No one's wasting away before your eyes, but the edges of your existence are shrinking. Less bread, thinner soup, more grit between your teeth because the flour hasn't been sifted properly. You chew slowly to make it last, acutely aware of the eyes that flick toward your mess tin even after theirs are empty. The company cook mutters about the army bakers stretching rye flour with whatever they can grind. Pea meal, dried potatoes, things he won't name. You're pretty sure he's not joking. The soup changes flavor daily. One night it's heavy with cabbage. The next it tastes faintly of turnips and smoke. The meat ration, when it comes, is stringy and unidentifiable. You've stopped expecting real coffee. The dark liquid in your cup smells vaguely of roasted grain and has the warming effect of a polite handshake. Pleasant, but hardly invigorating. You sip it anyway, because warmth is warmth, and there's little enough of that to go around. Your squad starts keeping mental tallies of who's best at scrounging extras. One man's friendly with a supply train driver. Another has an uncanny knack for finding abandoned gardens with a few stubborn carrots still in the dirt. You'd be amazed how many half-wild chickens roam the countryside, roosting in barns everyone assumed were empty. A fresh egg, fried in a dented mess tin over a twig fire, tastes like a feast. Still, the shortage has teeth. You notice your belt cinching tighter, your greatcoat hanging looser. Some men take to keeping a slice of bread in their pocket during sentry duty, nibbling it slowly to stave off the hollow ache. Others smoke more, letting the bitter taste of tobacco trick their stomachs into temporary silence. The officers try to soften the blow with talk of Leningrad's worst suffering. How the people inside must be down to eating whatever they can scrape together. You don't doubt it, but the thought isn't as satisfying as they seem to expect. Hunger is personal. Knowing someone else is colder or hungrier doesn't fill your mess tin. You pull sentry duty one evening along the marsh's edge, the sun dipping early behind a smear of gray cloud. The wind carries a faint trace of wood smoke drifting from the city. You lean against the rough timber of the watch post, gnawing at a crust you've been saving all day. Across the river, the distant clang of a tram bell echoes, thin but unmistakable. It's an absurd sound in the middle of a siege, civilian life refusing to vanish entirely. You wonder if the passengers think the same about the men watching them from the far bank. As the days pass, the shortage seeps into your bones in subtler ways. You wake slower, your steps dragging just a little more on the duckboards between trenches. Climbing in and out of your position leaves your legs aching in a way that feels older than your years. You still pull your weight, still shoulder your rifle when the sergeant barks, but every movement carries the faint lag of a body running on reserves. Historians still argue whether the German high command underestimated how the siege would strain its own men, or whether they simply didn't care. The truth? Depends who you ask. You suspect the answer lies somewhere between. To the men in staff cars, you're a neat line on a map, part of the ring they keep tightening with each communique. Out here, the line blurs into wet boots, thin soup, and the slow gnaw of hunger. By late October, snow starts falling in hesitant flurries. It doesn't stick yet, but the flakes cling to your collar's fur, melting into cold trickles down your neck. The ground hardens underfoot, at least making marching easier, but it also means nothing fresh will grow. Whatever was left in the fields has already been picked over by every army, civilian, and stray dog between here and Narva. In the evenings, the men swap stories about meals they've had before the war. Thick slices of bread still warm from the oven, stews so hearty a spoon could stand upright, plates piled high with roasted meat. Someone mentions dumplings, and suddenly everyone's leaning in, describing in vivid detail the perfect one they remember. You close your eyes and try to taste it. Sometimes, that's almost enough. On your next trip to the rear for supplies, you pass a stretch of track lined with silent, frost-rimmed freight cars. The markings on the sides are faded, but you can still make out the names of cities far from here. Inside, the cars are empty except for a few abandoned sacks spilling gray flour onto the planks. You dip a hand in, feeling the dry powder slip through your fingers. It smells faintly sweet, almost like home. That night, you share your find with the others. One man suggests baking it into flatbread. Another thinks it's too much effort for such a small haul. In the end, you mix it into the soup, thickening it just enough to make everyone feel like they've eaten something solid. The mood lifts for an hour. You count that as a victory. Your world has narrowed to these small triumphs now. An extra ladle of soup from the cook. A tin of sardines scrounged from a passing convoy. A letter from home arriving unexpectedly with the rations. They don't erase the hunger, but they blunt its edge for a little while. One evening, you find yourself staring at the city's skyline again, its spires etched black against a violet dusk. You imagine the kitchens inside, the empty cupboards, the long bread lines where the rations never seem enough. For a moment, the lines between us and them blur, and all you see is the shared reality of empty stomachs beneath the same cold sky. Then your sergeant calls you back to the line, and the thought dissolves into the crunch of boots on frozen earth. The siege holds. The ring tightens. The bread ration shrinks again. You chew slowly, because that's all you can do. Night on the front is a slow dripping thing. It's not the silence you expect. It's layered with sounds that only make sense once you've been here long enough. A sapling creaks against its frozen neighbor. The wind threads through tangled barbed wire, making a faint, high whistle. Somewhere out in the blackness, water gurgles over a half-submerged log in the Neva's shallows. You lie in your shallow pit under a tarpaulin, eyes half closed, trying to decide if you're hearing nothing or everything at once. Your squad draws listening post duty tonight. That means crawling beyond your own wire to a spot you hope the Soviets haven't discovered. It's thankless work. No one will mention your name in the battalion diary for this. You won't even get warm. But in a siege, what you hear matters as much as what you see. The sergeant leads the way, moving low and slow, his boots barely kissing the frozen grass. You follow, belly pressed to the ground, your breath fogging the rim of your scarf. Behind you, the trench line fades into a darker shadow against the snow-dusted earth. Ahead stretches a no-man's land of stumps, craters, and twisted metal, ugly by daylight, a void at night. Halfway out, you drop into a shell scrape no deeper than a man's knees. You press yourself against the frozen earth and listen. Muffled voices drift from somewhere beyond the wire, Russian, quick and quiet, as if they don't want even the frost to hear. You catch a word here and there from the handful you've picked up, Tovarish, comrade, period, forward, knock you, tonight. It's enough to ease the safety catch off your rifle, though you keep it cradled low. The wind shifts, bringing the faint clang of metal on metal. Could be a mess tin, could be a drop tool, or it could be someone setting up something heavier, something meant to ruin your evening. You glance at the sergeant. He just tilts his head, listening harder. Historians still debate how much of siege warfare is real action and how much is theater. One side pretending to be busier or stronger than they are, the other trying to read the script without missing the crucial scene. Out here, you're not thinking in those terms. You're thinking about the cold creeping into your fingers, about how far you are from your own trench, and about whether the Soviet who just coughed behind that stump is looking your way. An hour passes like a slow-turning wheel. Your knees stiffen, your toes throb in your boots. The cold settles into your bones until you're certain you'll carry it forever. Every now and then, you hear the faint brush of movement, a branch bending, a step crunching on frozen soil. Impossible to tell if it's deliberate or just the land shifting under the wind. Either way, you file it away for the debrief. Somewhere to your right, across no man's land, a tram bell rings again inside Leningrad. The sound is faint but distinct, absurd in its normality. It drifts over the darkness like a reminder that not far away, people are still trying to live ordinary lives. It makes the wire between you and them feel thinner somehow, though you know it's thick enough to keep you apart. Closer now, a low murmur rises and falls. You can't see the shapes, but you sense them, men huddled against the cold, maybe peering toward your own line with the same wary curiosity. In the dark, enemies are more idea than flesh. You wonder if they imagine you as some faceless machine of the siege, the way you sometimes imagine them. The sergeant signals the pullback. No sudden moves, just the slow, careful reverse crawl toward your own wire. The return feels longer, every rustle amplified in your ears. The first glimpse of your trench is a relief warmer than any greatcoat. You slip back over the parapet, boots thumping softly on the duckboards. Back inside, the dugout smells of damp wool, stale tobacco, and stew that's been reheating for hours. Someone hands you a steaming tin. You wrap your hands around it, feeling sensation creep back into your fingers. The sergeant scribbles a note for the duty officer. Enemy active tonight. Movement near wire. Possible prep for raid. You know tomorrow someone higher up will read it, nod, and add it to a stack of identical reports. Life in the siege perimeter runs on these small exchanges, quiet nights punctuated by minor alarms. You start recognizing the rhythms. The Soviets grow bolder in the hours before dawn. The wind always shifts when you're farthest from shelter. And the moments of real danger are often preceded by lulls so deep they make you doubt your own ears. In the afternoons, you sometimes walk the forward paths with a field telephone operator. The line runs along poles strung just above the frozen ground, looping toward the listening posts. You check for breaks, scanning for the telltale sag that means someone or something has tampered. Once, you find a section dangling loose, the insulation neatly sliced. Whether it was an accident or a Soviet patrol, no one can say, but it leaves a weight in your chest that follows you back to the trench. One evening, the company rotates pairs through a forward listening hole, a pit dug almost within shouting distance of the Soviet line. You draw the late-night shift, climbing down into the cramped space with your rifle and a thin blanket. It smells of damp rope and last week's tobacco. You sit shoulder to shoulder with your partner, trading quiet comments about the cold until voices beyond the wire make you both fall silent. The murmur comes again, closer this time. Words you don't know, laughter you do. The hair on your neck stirs. The laughter isn't mocking. It's just men talking among themselves, like you and your comrade here. But it cuts through the darkness in a way no gunfire could. It reminds you this isn't just a line on a map. It's two groups of men crouched in the same cold, listening for each other's next move. When your shift ends and you crawl back through the wire, the eastern sky is just beginning to pale. Frost glitters on the duckboards, and the air smells faintly of pine from the logs stacked along the trench wall. You hand off your post to the next pair, trade nods, and duck into the dugout. The cook is ladling out the morning's thin porridge. You take yours, find a quiet corner, and eat slowly. The listening posts don't make the headlines. They don't break sieges or win battles, but they stitch the days together, one watch at a time. Each a reminder that the front here is made of more than assaults and counter-assaults. It's made of waiting, of listening, of hearing the tram bells and wondering who else hears them too. By late December, the siege has found its rhythm, a steady pulse measured in artillery exchanges across the Neva. You wake to it, eat to it, fall asleep to it. Some days it's a slow, deliberate thump every few minutes, as if the guns are testing the air. Other days it's a relentless drumming, each blast layered over the echo of the last until you can't tell where one ends and another begins. You've learned to read the cadence. The heavier, deeper booms come from your side, 150 millimeters or 210 millimeters pieces stationed well behind the lines. The sharper cracks with that peculiar tearing sound, Soviet 76 millimeters field guns or mortars. You can't see them from your position, but you feel their presence in your bones. Your section holds ground just far enough back from the river to glimpse water between birch trunks. On cold mornings, steam rising off the Neva mingles with fog, turning the far bank into a wavering mirage. Somewhere beyond that shimmer, Soviet gunners watch for movement. You've learned not to silhouette yourself against the snow. One morning you're sent to assist the artillery observer. His shelter is a shallow pit dug into a rise, roof camouflaged with snow-dusted branches. Peering through his scope, he calls corrections to gun crews behind you. You note ranges and bearings like you understand them, mostly listening, half to the clipped radio chatter, half to the distant cough of big guns. When your batteries fire, the air in the pit shivers. Concussions thump through your boots as shells arc toward the city, their trails faint against pale sky. Seconds later, muffled impacts echo back. The observer adjusts his dials, sends new coordinates. It's strangely clinical for something so destructive. The Soviets answer in kind. You hear incoming rounds before seeing impacts, a rising howl that tightens your shoulders instinctively. First shells land wide, spraying snow and dirt harmlessly. The second salvo comes closer, blasting grit into your face. You duck, though veterans say if you hear the shell, it's already past you. Back in the trench, men speculate about Soviet gun positions. Some swear they're hidden in the city itself, others think in riverside woods. A few claim spotting flashes from Smolny Cathedral's spire, though whether true or siege legend, no one knows. Historians still debate how much these artillery duels achieved. Some say it was psychological warfare, meant to wear down nerves. Others insist it kept siege lines locked in place. The truth? Depends who you ask. To you, it feels like a conversation in a language of blasts and echoes, each side repeating itself until words lose meaning. Occasionally, the duel shifts to smaller weapons. Mortars cough behind lines, their shells plopping into snow with deceptively soft thuds. You've learned to distinguish the close ones, the thump that makes your neck prickle, from distant reports you can ignore. On quiet days, you study shelling's patterns. Craters pockmark fields like frozen ponds. Trees stand in jagged rows where others were stripped away. Wire tangles slump where blasts bent stakes into crooked spears. The land itself is being rewritten, not by hands, but by explosive punctuation marks. One afternoon, you're in a forward shelter when Soviets begin a sharp bombardment. Rounds walk across snow toward you in deliberate steps. You hunch low, counting intervals, waiting for the pattern to pass. Afterwards, you emerge to find the trench wall dusted with powder shaken from fir branches. The only casualty is a mess tin dented beyond recognition. Its owner holds it up, shakes his head, and mutters it's the best excuse he's ever had not to wash it. The duel goes both ways. You watch your gunners work with grim artistry, measuring, adjusting, loading, firing in rhythms as natural as breathing. Each blast sends ripples through snow at their feet, spent shells tumbling down in metallic cascades. They never look toward the city. I stay fixed on the next round, the next fuse, the next command. Sometimes batteries relocate to avoid counterfire. Hauling heavy guns through snow-choked paths is as miserable as it sounds. You've helped, dragging sledges with shells nearly your weight, breath freezing to your scarf, shoulders aching for days. But when the first salvo arcs out, you feel stubborn satisfaction. At night, artillery takes on strange beauty. Muzzle flashes bloom briefly against darkness, their light swallowed quickly by snow-heavy clouds. Flares drift over no man's land, casting wire and shell holes in ghostly silver. For a moment, it almost feels like the world's lit just for you. Then the next report booms across the river, reminding you this light show is anything but festive. The duel never truly stops. Even in lulls, the next shot always threatens. You flinch at distant cracks that turn out to be ice splitting on the river. Cold plays tricks with sound, carrying it oddly. A burst you swear is right behind you lands half a kilometer away. One evening you climb the trench lip, studying the far bank through field glasses. The city is a gray smear against snow, occasional smoke puffs betraying gun positions. You wonder if someone over there is glassing you back. By the time you turn in, the rhythm has slowed again. A boom here, an answering crack there, like two old men arguing without energy left. You lie back in the dugout, roof beams creaking softly, letting the echoes fade into Siege's background hum. Tomorrow, the duel will resume. It always does. January 1942 arrives with a brittle clarity that makes every breath feel like swallowing glass. The snow underfoot squeals like crushed chalk with each step. At first, the routine at Schlüsselburg remains unchanged, watching the ice, noting enemy movements, bracing for occasional Soviet probes. Then in the early hours of the 12th, the siege's heartbeat stutters and changes. It begins with a vibration so deep you feel it in your molars before your ears register the sound. The horizon beyond the Soviet lines flickers, then glows steadily like a false dawn blooming in the wrong direction. Word spreads through the trenches like voltage through a wire. Iskra. The Soviets have launched Operation Spark, an all-out offensive to smash through the southern flank and reconnect the city with the outside world. The first shells land on your sector's far edge. Blasts heave fountains of snow and ice into the air, the concussions echoing down the river valley. You press against the frozen trench wall, watching the methodical Soviet barrage creep forward. Your company commander paces behind the firing step, glancing at the field phone like he can will it to deliver clearer orders. By mid-morning, the bombardment spreads like wildfire. The ice road, your familiar frozen plain, transforms into a churned nightmare. Smoke plumes rise near the river bend, where neighboring regiments are dug in. Through binoculars, you spot dark shapes moving in loose waves across the snow. Infantry advancing behind squat tanks that grind forward with terrifying patience. The order comes clipped and urgent. Stand ready to fire. You ease your rifle onto the trench wall, the stock cold against your cheek. The tanks remain out of small arms range, but anti-tank crews already adjust their sights. When the first gun barks, the recoil shivers through the frozen earth. The shot strikes near a tank's tread. It jerks sideways like a wounded animal, then keeps coming. The Soviet artillery answers with renewed fury. Shells slam into forward trenches with terrifying precision. You drop to the duckboards as a blast rips into the parapet meters away, showering you with frozen clods. The air reeks of scorched earth and cordite. Down the line, someone shouts for a medic, the words torn away by the wind. You steal glances between impacts. Soviet infantry keep coming, dark figures darting between snowdrifts. Some fall under machine gun fire. Others press forward with stubborn determination. Behind them, tanks belch smoke into the pale sky, their turrets swinging toward your positions. Historians would later debate whether the Iskra breakthrough was inevitable given the Soviet forces committed. The truth? Depends who you ask. From your frozen trench, inevitability feels like watching floodwaters rise toward your doorstep. By afternoon, the pressure on your sector eases. The main thrust has shifted west, probing for weaker links in the siege chain. You watch Soviet forces redirect, tanks changing course, infantry flowing around obstacles like water finding cracks. The guns slacken as daylight fades. That night, runners bring word. They've made contact. Soviet troops from the city have met their comrades from outside, carving a narrow corridor through the siege lines. It's tenuous, barely wide enough for a supply cart, but it's open. Leningrad's lifeline now runs across land instead of just frozen lake. The news settles heavily in the dugout. Some men look grim, others strangely relieved, as if they'd been waiting for this blow to land. The Berliner stares at the stove's embers before saying quietly, "So, now everything changes." And change it does. Within days, artillery duels intensify as Soviet shells reach deeper behind your lines. Patrols become deadly games of cat and mouse in the new no man's land around the corridor. You're sent on one such mission 2 nights later, skirting the corridor's edge where snow is churned to filthy slush, littered with abandoned gear and shattered sledges. The air smells of smoke and something sharper, the metallic tang of fresh spilled blood frozen in the snow. Back in the trench, tension hangs thicker than the fog. Everyone knows the siege has shifted from an unbroken ring to a clenched fist with one finger pried loose. No one can say if the gap will widen or be crushed shut, but you're suddenly much closer to the hinge than anyone wants to be. The Soviets waste no time reinforcing their new link. Through binoculars, you spot constant movement beyond the corridor, trucks, sledges, marching columns. Your artillery pounds at them, but the flow never stops. The corridor may be narrow, but it's enough to change the mathematics of starvation inside the city. For you, it means longer watches, colder hours scanning the gap, more nights falling asleep to guns arguing in the distance. The siege isn't over, but it's no longer the siege you marched into months ago. The frozen river still lies between you and them, silver under winter moonlight. But now, beyond that bend, there's a road where none existed before. And you can't shake the feeling that in the long history of sieges, this thin path through the snow might matter more than all the shells you fired. The maps in the command dugout tell a story of erosion. Where once the siege ring around Leningrad had been drawn in unbroken black ink, now a narrow gap east of the city bleeds through the parchment, marked with hesitant red pencil strokes. The staff officers call it a Versorgungskorridor, a supply corridor, but to the men in the trenches, it's an open wound in their defensive line. Your orders crystallize with grim clarity. Hold the flanks of this breach, prevent it from widening into something the Soviets can exploit fully. The ground you're assigned, a tangle of low ridges and frozen marsh, offers just enough cover to make both attack and defense brutally unpredictable. Moving into position feels like walking onto a half-frozen lake. You advance in scattered groups along paths trampled into the snow, maintaining distance in case Soviet observers are hunting for clustered targets. The artillery's voice never fully fades, sometimes swelling to a roar when bombardments crash down nearby, sometimes dropping to a sullen mutter like distant thunder. Your new home is more makeshift than previous positions. The trenches are shallow wounds in the earth, hastily reinforced with whatever logs could be dragged forward. The barbed wire sags in uneven stretches, gaps marked with sticks thrust into the ground like primitive grave markers. The snow here is churned into strange, ice-crusted waves, testament to how many times this ground has changed hands in recent weeks. Your first watch in this sector drives home how exposed you've become. The Soviet lines are alarmingly close. On clear days, you can actually see dark shapes moving behind their trench walls. Somewhere over there, enemy soldiers are peering back at you through their own field glasses. Flares go up more frequently now, their harsh white light throwing grotesque shadows across the snowscape. You learn to move like a shadow yourself, keeping low, avoiding sudden motions that might draw fire. The fighting here lacks the grand choreography of staff maps. It's all quick jabs and probing fingers. Soviet patrols testing the wire at night. Sudden machine gun bursts from concealed positions in the tree line. Mortar rounds coughing unexpectedly from the darkness. One moonless night, a raiding party slips close enough to carve through a section of your wire before sentries spot them. The alarm goes up. Rifles crack like snapping twigs. The attackers melt back into the forest like ghosts. By dawn, engineers are already threading fresh coils through the breach, their breath pluming in the freezing air as they work. You're assigned to one such repair detail. Handling barbed wire in deep winter is misery distilled. The metal burns through gloves with cold, every twist sending fresh aches up your forearms. But without these jagged teeth, the trench feels naked. You work until your fingers lose feeling, pausing only to stomp blood back into your frozen toes. The wind slicing across the marsh cuts through layers of wool like they're tissue paper. 2 nights later, the Soviets try again, this time with a feint. A handful of men dash forward under cover of a mortar barrage that sounds more aggressive than accurate. You fire from the trench wall, muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the frost coating your sleeves. When it's over, the only movement comes from snowflakes drifting through the dying light of a flare. The attack was theater, but good theater still gets your heart pounding. Historians might later call this period a stalemate, a grinding contest of endurance in frozen no man's land. The truth? Depends who you ask. For you crouched in this icy ditch, it's less about abstract endurance and more about surviving the next watch, the next patrol, the next time you have to step into that killing zone and pray the other side blinks first. Life behind the immediate front offers no real respite. Supply sledges crawl along snow-choked tracks at a snail's pace, pulled by hollow-flanked horses breathing steam like antique locomotives. The loads grow lighter with each trip, Fewer rations, scarcer ammunition, but complaining won't fill your mess tin. The dugout you share with 3 others smells perpetually of damp wool and the acrid sting of primer from cleaned rifle bolts. Evenings are spent huddled around a wheezing stove, feeding it scraps of wood foraged from God knows where. The warmth never penetrates far, but it's enough to thaw stiff fingers and make the air slightly less knife-edged. Conversation inevitably circles back to the corridor. Some swear it's only a matter of time before Soviet forces punch it wider, turning your position into the crumbling edge of a retreat. Others argue winter will freeze it shut again, that the Red Army expended too much strength just to pry it open this far. You don't waste breath on predictions. Out here, speculation evaporates faster than snow on a hot stove. On a rare clear afternoon, you climb to the trench lip and look west. Sun glints off the churned snow, making the landscape deceptively peaceful. But you can trace the corridor's path in the disturbed terrain. The darker patches where shell bursts have torn up the earth, the jagged stumps of what was once a pine grove. It looks like some giant took a fingernail and scratched it across the land. One day, a runner arrives with word that Soviet artillery has moved into new positions. You're ordered to deepen firing steps and reinforce dugout roofs with whatever timber can be scavenged. It's back-breaking work, picks sparking against frozen earth, shoulders burning as you wrestle logs into place. You strip to your undershirt despite the cold, sweat freezing into salty trails down your back. That night, the bombardment comes. It starts with isolated shots spaced just far enough apart to make you wonder if it's harassment fire. Then the tempo quickens, the air thickening with the scream and crunch of incoming shells. You press into the trench wall, tasting dirt in your mouth as frozen clods rain down. Somewhere to your right, a dugout takes a direct hit. The muffled shouts afterward confirming men are alive inside, though probably not unscathed. When the barrage lifts, the silence feels unnatural. You risk a glance over the parapet. No movement yet. The Soviets aren't pressing forward this time. Maybe it was just a reminder that they know where you are and that this corridor business isn't finished. The days settle into a rhythm of watchfulness and repair. Your world shrinks to the length of this trench and the slice of sky above it. The corridor remains, stubborn as a bad tooth, and you remain at its edge, holding your frozen meter of the line. February 1944 arrives with a vengeance. The air so cold it feels like breathing shards of glass. The snow along your sector has hardened into wind-carved sculptures, their surfaces glittering under the weak winter sun. For days, rumors have slithered through the trenches like snakes. The Soviets are massing forces, bringing up fresh artillery, preparing something massive. Then on the morning of the 12th, the siege's fragile equilibrium shatters. It begins with a rumble so deep you feel it in your ribcage before your ears register the sound. The eastern horizon flickers, then glows steadily like a false dawn blooming backward. The word spreads through the trenches before the officers confirm it. The Leningrad-Novgorod offensive has begun. Soviet forces are throwing everything at breaking the siege completely this time. The first shells fall with terrifying precision on your sector's far flank. Geysers of snow and frozen earth erupt skyward, the concussions slamming into you like physical blows. You press into the trench wall as dirt and ice shards rain down. The world reduced to the thunder of impacts and the coppery taste of fear in your mouth. The company commander shouts orders, but the words are swallowed by the bombardment's roar. By mid-morning, the barrage has become a living thing, an unrelenting storm of steel and fire walking methodically across your positions. The frozen marsh you've called home for months transforms into a churned wasteland of smoking craters and shattered timber. Through the haze, dark shapes emerge from the tree line. Soviet infantry advancing in loose waves, their greatcoats flapping like wings against the snow. Behind them, the unmistakable silhouettes of T-34 tanks grind forward, their treads squealing on the frozen ground. Hold for anti-tank crews, someone shouts down the line. You brace your rifle against the parapet, watching through narrowed eyes as the lead tank's turret swings toward your position. The anti-tank gun barks once, twice, the second shot striking the tank's flank with a metallic scream. The machine jerks sideways, smoke pouring from its hatches, but two more immediately take its place. The Soviet infantry keep coming, their advance undeterred by machine gun fire raking across their ranks. Some fall, others press forward with that terrifying, methodical courage you've come to recognize. Their artillery shifts focus now, shells walking back toward your secondary trenches, cutting off retreat paths. You realize with cold certainty, this isn't a probe or a feint. This is the hammer blow. Historians would later call this the inevitable collapse of Army Group North's positions. The truth? From your vantage point in the trench, inevitable feels like watching an avalanche gather momentum. Terrifyingly unstoppable, yet still surreal in its unfolding. By afternoon, the line has buckled in multiple places. You catch glimpses of men falling back in short dashes, their movements frantic compared to the Soviets' relentless advance. The order comes to withdraw to secondary positions, but the communication trenches are already under artillery fire. You move low and fast, your pack jostling against your back, the snow churned to filthy slush underfoot. The new line is little more than a shallow scrape in the earth, hastily reinforced with whatever logs and sandbags could be dragged forward. From here, you can see the full scope of the Soviet push, tanks fanning out across the frozen marshes, infantry flowing around strongpoints like water finding cracks. Your artillery tries to stem the tide, but their fire lacks the coordination of the Soviet barrage. Shells land haphazardly, doing little to slow the advance. That night, word spreads through the dugouts. The High Command has ordered a full retreat toward the Neva River. The Siege of Leningrad, the 2-year-long stranglehold, is being abandoned. There's no grand announcement, no dramatic speech. Just quiet orders passed from officer to sergeant, sergeant to squad leader. You pack your few belongings with numb fingers, the reality not yet sinking in. The retreat begins before dawn. You march in scattered columns along roads glazed with ice, the occasional Soviet flare casting long shadows behind you. Villages you passed through months ago now lie in ruins, their chimneys cold, their windows staring like empty eye sockets. Supply columns move in both directions, weary infantry trudging west, ammunition sledges straining east toward the rear guard. On the fourth day, you cross into Estonia. The landscape changes subtly. The forests grow denser, the farmsteads more clustered, as if the land itself is trying to offer shelter. Narva lies ahead, with its medieval castle and river line that must now be held. You try not to think about Leningrad, about the frozen Neva, the distant spires, the long months spent staring at them from trenches and observation posts. One evening, camped in a pine grove, the Berliner breaks the silence. 2 years, he says, rolling a cigarette with meticulous care. 2 years in front of that damned city. You nod, watching the firelight play across his hollowed cheeks. It's impossible to reconcile that span of time with where you now sit. Cold, exhausted, marching away from what was supposed to be the great encirclement. The wind shifts, carrying with it the faintest hint of thaw, a moisture in the air that wasn't there before. Somewhere behind you, beyond the forests and ruined villages, Leningrad is breathing freely for the first time in nearly 900 days. The thought should anger you, but all you feel is a strange emptiness, like a fever that's finally broken. You roll into your blanket, listening to the pines whisper overhead. The siege is over. The war is not. And tomorrow, you'll keep walking this same road, just a little farther west. The road west unfolds like a fever dream, each kilometer blurring into the next as Army Group North stumbles toward Narva. The snow underfoot has taken on a strange, glassy quality. No longer soft powder, but a brittle crust that shatters with every step, the shards scattering like broken crystal. You march in loose columns, the men around you moving with the mechanical gait of sleepwalkers, their faces hollowed by 2 winters of siege warfare. Only the occasional Soviet reconnaissance plane buzzing overhead breaks the rhythm of crunching boots and labored breathing. Narva emerges from the winter haze like a medieval vision. its Teutonic castle rising sheer from the riverbank, the swollen river itself carving a natural moat through the frozen landscape. The city straddles the border like some contested chess piece, its Germanic spires and Russian domes bearing witness to centuries of conflict. Now it will become your new defensive line, the last barrier between the Red Army and the Baltic coast. The defensive preparations have an air of desperate improvisation. Engineers scramble to fortify positions along the river's western bank, their breath steaming in the cold as they wrestle with frozen earth and splintered timber. The trenches here are shallow, the dugouts hastily roofed with doors ripped from nearby barns. You're assigned a section near the Hermann Castle, its once proud walls now pockmarked by artillery fire, the lion crest above its gates half shattered by a direct hit. Dig deeper. The sergeant growls, kicking at the shallow scrape that will supposedly protect you from Soviet artillery. Unless you fancy swimming home. You swing your pickaxe into the iron-hard ground, each impact sending jolts up your arms. The man beside you, a Saxon with a perpetual squint, works in silence, his movements precise despite the cold turning his fingers blue. Word filters down that the Soviets have reached the outskirts of Narva's twin city, Ivangorod, on the eastern bank. Through field glasses, you can see their reconnaissance patrols moving among the bombed-out buildings, their figures dark against the snow. The river, swollen with early meltwater, churns between you, a temporary barrier that grows thinner with each passing day. The first artillery duel begins at dawn. Soviet guns hidden in the ruins of Ivangorod open up without warning, their shells whistling over the river to explode along your newly dug positions. You're caught mid-shave, the razor slipping as you dive for cover, the mirror propped against your pack shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. The barrage lasts exactly 17 minutes. You count each one, before falling silent as abruptly as it began. 3 men are dead in your sector, their bodies arranged neatly under blood-stained blankets near the medical dugout. That afternoon, you're rotated forward to a listening post near the riverbank. The position is little more than a foxhole scooped from the frozen mud, lined with splintered floorboards from a nearby house. The previous occupants have left their mark. A child's mitten, half buried in the dirt, a torn photograph of a smiling woman that you carefully tuck into your pocket. The river gurgles just meters away, its dark water carrying chunks of ice that clink together like drunken toastmasters. Night falls with unsettling speed at this latitude. One moment the western sky is stained crimson, the next you're blinking against complete darkness. The Soviets don't bother with subtlety. Flares arc into the sky at regular intervals, bathing no man's land in harsh white light. During one such illumination, you spot movement on the opposite bank, dark shapes hauling something heavy toward the water's edge. Before you can radio it in, the flare dies, leaving only afterimages and questions. The answer comes at midnight. The first pontoon bangs against the western bank like a drunken guest at the wrong door. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the night erupts with the staccato of machine guns and the deeper cough of mortars. You fire blindly into the darkness, your rifle's muzzle flash surely marking you as a target. Somewhere to your left, a scream cuts through the chaos, cut off abruptly by the wet crunch of a grenade detonation. Dawn reveals the cost. The riverbank is littered with shattered pontoons and dark shapes that might be logs or men. From this distance, it's impossible to tell. The water has swallowed whatever the Soviets tried to bring across, leaving only frothy eddies as evidence of the night's struggle. Your company has lost 7 men, their names already fading from conversation as the living turn their attention to the next attack, the next meal, the next miserable night in this frozen hell. The pattern repeats over the following days. Soviet probes at dusk, artillery harassment throughout the night, the occasional all-out assault that leaves both sides bloodied but the front lines unchanged. The river remains the true defender, its icy waters claiming more lives than bullets or shells. You watch it daily, noting how the ice floes grow smaller, how the current seems to strengthen with each passing week. Spring is coming, and with it, the real flood. One evening, As you're boiling water for ersatz coffee, the Berliner approaches with 2 mugs. Heard from the radio operator, he says, handing you one. They've lifted the siege completely. Leningrad's got trains running again. You sip the bitter liquid, trying to summon some emotion, anger, regret, but finding only numbness. That chapter is closed. This river, this castle, this daily struggle to hold another meaningless stretch of dirt. This is your war now. The stars are unusually bright tonight, their cold light reflecting off the river's dark surface. Somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, the city you spent 2 years besieging is celebrating its hard-won freedom. Somewhere to the west, the Reich you're supposedly defending crumbles under relentless bombing. And here you stand, in this medieval border town, waiting for the next attack, the next order, the next meaningless sacrifice in a war that long ago stopped making sense. You finish your coffee and crawl back into the dugout. Tomorrow will bring another dawn, another barrage, another day of watching the river and waiting for the thaw. The siege may be over, but the dying continues. Some things, it seems, never change. The Neva River thaws in fits and starts, its icy skin cracking with sounds like distant artillery. Each morning you check the bank, noting how the ice floes shrink from dinner plate size to saucers, then to mere slivers that dissolve in the current. The Soviet attacks follow the same erratic rhythm, sometimes probing at dawn, sometimes launching full-scale assaults under cover of darkness, always keeping you guessing. Their artillery has grown bolder, shells now reaching the supply depots west of the city, the explosions sending up plumes of flour and medical supplies that drift over the river like grotesque snowfall. You're stationed near the railway bridge ruins, where twisted steel girders rise from the water like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The position offers a clear view of Ivangorod's shattered factories on the opposite bank, perfect cover for Soviet snipers. 3 men in your company have learned this the hard way, their blood still staining the duckboards where they fell. Now everyone moves in quick, crouching dashes between sandbag positions, their helmets dulled with mud to avoid reflecting sunlight. One mist-shrouded dawn, you're on sentry duty when the river itself seems to come alive. At first you think it's the ice breaking up, until the dark shapes resolve into boats, dozens of them, packed with Soviet infantry paddling silently across the current. You fire 3 shots in quick succession, the agreed distress signal, before scrambling to wake the others. The ensuing battle is chaos incarnate. Machine gun tracers skipping across the water like angry fireflies, mortar rounds sending up geysers that drench everyone within 20 meters, the screams of wounded men blending with the river's gurgle. When it's over, the water runs pink around the wreckage of swamped boats. A few Soviets made it ashore. You find their bodies in the morning, frozen in grotesque poses at the base of the castle walls. One still clutches a bouquet of early spring flowers, the yellow blooms impossibly vibrant against his gray uniform. You bury them hastily in a shell crater, saying nothing when the Saxon slips the flowers into his pocket. As April progresses, the front settles into an uneasy stalemate. The Soviets control the eastern bank, but seem reluctant to attempt another major crossing. Your artillery harasses their positions, they harass yours, and the river carries away the evidence of this pointless exchange. The real enemy now is the thaw itself. Trenches that were frozen solid at night become knee-deep bogs by afternoon. Dugout roofs sag under meltwater, and every piece of equipment grows a fuzzy coat of mold. The Berliner develops a cough that rattles his entire frame, the sound wet and troubling. He refuses to report sick, instead brewing a foul-smelling tea from pine needles that does nothing but stain his mustache yellow. You share your dwindling tobacco ration with him, both of you smoking in silence as you watch Soviet supply trucks moving along the opposite bank. They seem to have everything these days: fresh troops, new artillery pieces, even the occasional tank rumbling past. Your own supplies arrive sporadically, often half ruined by moisture or pilfered somewhere along the chain. One evening, as you're boiling leather strips to make something resembling soup, the company commander gathers everyone around. His uniform is noticeably cleaner than yours, his boots only slightly scuffed. "New orders," he announces, avoiding eye contact. "We're to hold this position until relieved by the 11th SS Division." A murmur runs through the men. The word SS carries both hope and dread these days. The commander continues. "Intel suggests the Soviets are preparing a major offensive. We must." The rest is drowned out by a sudden artillery barrage from across the river. You dive for cover as the world dissolves into noise and flying dirt. When it ends minutes later, you find the commander sprawled in the mud, his left leg bent at an impossible angle. The Saxon drags him to the medic's dugout while the rest of you scramble to positions, expecting an assault. None comes, just the river chuckling to itself as it carries away another day's worth of shells. That night, under a moon so bright it casts shadows, you take first watch on the riverbank. The water has risen noticeably, swallowing the lower sandbag barriers. Somewhere downstream, a tree trunk bobs past, its branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. You think of Leningrad, not the besieged city you knew, but the place it's becoming now, free to rebuild while you're stuck in this medieval backwater, fighting for ground that will be underwater come morning. A splash draws your attention. At first you assume it's more debris, until the dark shape resolves into a swimmer, a Soviet soldier caught in the current, his arms flailing weakly as the river carries him toward your position. You raise your rifle, then hesitate. He's weaponless, clearly disoriented, maybe a deserter. Before you can decide, the current sweeps him past, his face a pale blur in the moonlight. You watch until the river swallows him whole, then mark the spot in your mind. Not that it matters. At dawn, the promised SS relief force arrives. Boys mostly, their faces smooth beneath oversized helmets, their uniforms still crisp from the quartermaster. They eye your ragged company with a mixture of awe and disgust, keeping their distance as if poverty were contagious. Their commander, a blond giant with ice-blue eyes, barely glances at your sergeant's briefing before striding off to inspect the defenses. You watch them dig new positions with the enthusiasm of those who haven't yet learned how quickly war grinds down ideals. The handover takes less than an hour. Your company is to fall back to Tannenberg Line, whatever that is. As you pack your meager belongings, the Berliner nods toward the fresh-faced SS troops. "They'll learn," he croaks between coughs. "Or they'll die. Same as us." You shoulder your pack, taking one last look at the river now gleaming in the morning sun. However this ends, you won't miss this place. The road west is clogged with retreating units, their vehicles mired in mud that seems to grow deeper with each passing hour. You march in silence. The only sounds the squelch of boots and the occasional distant thunder of artillery. Somewhere ahead lies another defensive line, another river, another castle to defend. Somewhere behind, the war you thought you were fighting has already moved on without you. The Tannenberg Line smells of wet concrete and fresh earth, its half-finished bunkers gaping like missing teeth along the forested ridge. You arrive in twilight, your boots sinking into mortar mix that hasn't fully set, the chemical tang stinging your nostrils. The propaganda posters nailed to the trees show crisp Wehrmacht soldiers standing tall behind interlocking tank traps. Images so divorced from reality, they might as well be fairy tales. The actual defenses are a chaotic jumble. Teenage conscripts wrestling with anti-tank obstacles, engineers shouting over the whine of concrete mixers, and everywhere the sour stench of panic barely contained. Your company is assigned a sector near a crumbling medieval watchtower, its stones blackened by centuries of warfare. The trenches here are deeper than at Narva, the dugouts reinforced with proper timber, but the hasty construction shows in the crooked firing steps and poorly angled machine gun nests. The Berliner collapses onto a stack of sandbags, his coughing fits now leaving flecks of blood on his sleeve. When you offer him your canteen, he waves it away with a yellow-stained smile. "Save it for the Ivans," he rasps. "They'll be here soon enough." They arrive at dawn on the third day, not with the expected artillery barrage, but with the distant growl of tank engines echoing through the forest. The sound builds slowly, like an approaching thunderstorm. until the trees themselves seem to vibrate. Through binoculars, you spot them. A column of T-34s emerging from the morning mist, their green hulls streaked with mud, infantry clinging to the sides like barnacles. They advance methodically, pausing only to shell suspected strongpoints, their treads churning the damp earth into soup. The anti-tank guns open up first, their sharp cracks followed by the metallic screech of armor-piercing rounds finding, or missing, their marks. You watch one T-34 shudder to a halt, smoke pouring from its hatches, before two more rumble past its carcass. Then the order comes down the line. Fire at will. Your rifle joins the chorus, its report lost in the cacophony. The Soviet infantry scatter, some falling, others diving for cover behind burning wrecks, a few pressing forward with that terrifying, robotic determination. The battle rages all morning, the Soviets testing each weak point in the line while your artillery peppers their assembly areas. By noon, the forest floor is littered with spent casings, discarded bandages, and the occasional dark shape that doesn't move. The Berliner works his bolt with mechanical precision, his face gray beneath the grime. When a runner brings word that the left flank is crumbling, he just nods and fires again, as if he'd expected nothing less. Historians would later call this the Battle of the Tannenberg Line, a desperate attempt to stall the Soviet advance into Estonia. From your foxhole, it feels less like a battle and more like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. The positions are better than Narva's, the weapons marginally more plentiful, but the faces around you tell the truth. These are the last cards in a hand that was never going to win. As evening falls, the Soviets withdraw to regroup, leaving behind smoldering tanks and a no-man's land stinking of cordite and burnt flesh. You're rotating out of the front trench when the shelling starts. Not the methodical barrage of morning, but a hailstorm of rockets screaming from truck-mounted launchers hidden in the trees. The world dissolves into noise and flying dirt, the concussions slamming into your chest like hammer blows. When you come to, the Saxon is dragging you toward a crater, his mouth moving, but no words reaching you through the ringing in your ears. The next assault comes under cover of this chaos, Soviet infantry swarming through the gaps, torn by their artillery. For hours it's close-quarters madness. Bayonets and entrenching tools, pistol shots at point-blank range, men screaming in languages you don't understand. You fight back-to-back with the Berliner, his cough miraculously silenced by adrenaline, until suddenly it's over. The surviving Soviets melt back into the trees, leaving your sector bloodied but intact. Dawn reveals the cost. The medieval tower is now just a pile of rubble, its centuries-old stones no match for modern explosives. The trenches are clogged with debris and the groaning wounded. The Berliner sits calmly cleaning his rifle, his left sleeve dark and sticky where a bullet grazed his arm. They'll try again today, he says matter-of-factly, and the day after, until there's nothing left to stop them. He's right, of course. The pattern repeats with minor variations for 3 more days. Artillery softening the line, tanks probing for weaknesses, infantry swarming through the gaps. Each attack leaves your company smaller, the survivors more hollow-eyed. The promised reinforcements never materialize. The supply convoys bring less food and ammunition each time. By the 4th evening, even the SS boys look exhausted, their pristine uniforms now as filthy as yours. On the 5th morning, the shelling starts before first light. Not the usual rockets, but heavy artillery from guns you didn't know the Soviets had moved up. The bunker roof shudders under each impact, dust sifting down like malignant snow. When you risk a glance through the observation slit, your stomach lurches. Entire sections of the forest are simply gone, replaced by smoking craters and splintered stumps. The Berliner grabs your shoulder and points wordlessly. Soviet tanks are advancing through the devastation, not in columns, but in a solid wall of armor, their numbers impossible to count. The radio crackles with orders to fall back to secondary positions, but the route is already under direct fire. You move in short dashes, dodging from crater to crater, your pack jostling with every stumble. The Saxon takes a bullet through the thigh halfway there. You and the Berliner drag him the remaining meters, his blood leaving a slick trail in the mud. The secondary position turns out to be a shallow ditch behind an unfinished anti-tank ditch, its defenders already packing up to retreat further. That night, under cover of a providential fog, what's left of your company slips away westward. The Berliner supports the limping Saxon. You carry both their rifles along with your own. No one speaks. The Tannenberg line, that grand last stand, lasted barely a week. Somewhere ahead lies the Baltic coast and whatever evacuation ships might still be running. Somewhere behind, the war grinds on without you, its appetite unsated. You walk through the pre-dawn gloom, the forest slowly thinning into farmland. The Berliner's cough has returned with a vengeance, each spasm leaving him gasping. At a crossroads, you find a propaganda poster still intact, those impossibly clean soldiers standing defiant before their tank traps. The Saxon tears it down with his good arm and uses it to wrap his wounded leg. The gesture feels like the only honest commentary on this war you've ever seen. The road curves westward, toward the sea and whatever comes next. The Siege of Leningrad, the frozen rivers, the castles and trenches, and all those men left behind. They belong to another life now. You adjust the rifles on your shoulder and keep walking, one foot in front of the other, the Berliner's ragged breathing your only compass. The Baltic coast emerges from the morning mist like a half-remembered dream. Pale dunes giving way to slate-gray waves, the air thick with salt and the faint tang of burning oil. You arrive with the Berliner and the Saxon at midday, your little trio reduced to silent shuffling automatons. The evacuation beach is chaos incarnate. Wounded men propped against abandoned artillery pieces, naval officers shouting over the surf's roar, a handful of transport ships anchored just beyond the breakers. Someone has painted, "Welcome to the Third Reich," in peeling letters on a gutted Panzer's hull, the joke's bitter edge lost on the hollow-eyed soldiers waiting for salvation. The Saxon collapses onto the sand, his wounded leg leaving dark stains on the pebbles. The Berliner simply stands staring at the sea, his chest rattling with each breath. You scan the shoreline for familiar faces, but find none. Just thousands of strangers sharing the same vacant expression, their uniforms faded to anonymous grime. A naval petty officer moves down the beach, separating men into groups with the brisk efficiency of a butcher sorting cuts of meat. When he reaches your trio, he pauses at the Saxon's bloodied bandage. "Wound tickets," he demands. The Berliner coughs a laugh that turns into a spasm. You shake your head. Priority goes to wounded with paperwork. The petty officer snaps, already moving on. And typhus cases. His meaning hangs unspoken in the salty air. The healthy will wait until the ships have room. The sick will be left behind. You watch as medics move through the crowd, their white armbands stark against the drab uniforms, collecting dog tags from men too far gone to protest. Night falls with merciful swiftness. You build a lean-to from driftwood and a tattered sail, the Saxon's feverish moaning blending with the surf. The Berliner sits propped against a rusted anti-tank obstacle, smoking the last of his yellow-stained cigarettes with ritualistic care. Out in the bay, the transport ships glow like ghostly lanterns, their running lights reflecting on the black water. Every so often, a flare arcs into the sky from the eastern perimeter, Soviet probes testing the last defenses. At dawn, the first ship departs with its cargo of wounded and paperwork endowed. You watch it shrink into the horizon, its silhouette blurred by the rising mist. The beach feels emptier afterward, though just as crowded, as if hope itself has been rationed and shipped away. A field kitchen materializes near the dunes, doling out thin fish stew that tastes of the sea's bottom. You eat mechanically, your mess tin reflecting a face you barely recognize, gaunt, bearded, older than its years. Days pass in this limbo. The Saxon's wound festers despite the seawater rinses you administer. The Berliner's cough worsens, his fever dreams full of names you've never heard. You split your time between scavenging for food and standing in endless queues that lead nowhere. Rumors swirl like the gulls overhead. The Soviets are 20 kilometers away. The British have offered surrender terms. the last ships will leave at midnight. None prove true, yet each reshapes the crowd's mood like wind sculpting dunes. On the fourth morning, a proper hospital ship appears, its white hull emblazoned with red crosses that look freshly painted. A murmur runs through the beach as medics begin selecting patients. You help the Saxon limp toward the triage area, the Berliner trailing behind like a ghost. The doctor, a gray-faced man missing 2 fingers, takes one look at the Saxon's leg and scrawls something on his forehead with a grease pencil. The Berliner he examines longer, listening to his chest with a stethoscope that looks older than the war itself. Typhus, the doctor pronounces, stepping back. Quarantine section. He points to a roped-off area where men lie on stretchers in the open air, their eyes bright with fever. The Berliner meets your gaze and shrugs, a tiny movement that says everything. When the orderlies come for him, he presses something into your hand, his iron cross, the ribbon frayed, the metal warm from his pocket. You watch them carry him away, his skeletal frame barely making an impression on the stretcher. The hospital ship departs at dusk, its decks lined with silent watchers. You stand with the Saxon at the water's edge, the waves tugging at your boots as if reluctant to let anyone leave. Neither of you speak. There are no words for this moment. Only the salt on your lips and the slow understanding that some farewells are permanent. That night, the bombardment begins in earnest. Soviet artillery finds the range at last, their shells walking along the beach with methodical precision. You drag the Saxon into a crater left by some earlier explosion, his screams lost in the deafening impacts. The world narrows to flashes of light and darkness, the sand turning to liquid beneath each concussion. When dawn comes, half the beach looks rearranged, smoldering craters where men had slept, the skeletal remains of vehicles flipped like child's toys. Amid the chaos, a miracle. 3 torpedo boats appear just beyond the breakers, their sleek hulls cutting through the smoke like knives. No orders are given. The survivors simply rush into the surf, their desperation overcoming all discipline. You help the Saxon forward, the water rising to your waist, then your chest. Hands reach down from the nearest boat, hauling men aboard with no regard for rank or condition. When your turn comes, you nearly lose the Saxon to the undertow before strong arms drag you both onto the deck. The boat peels away before the last men are properly aboard, its engines screaming in protest. You collapse against the bulkhead, seawater streaming from your clothes, your lungs burning. The Saxon lies beside you, his face gray with pain and blood loss. As the shoreline recedes, you see figures still struggling in the water, dark heads bobbing among the waves, arms raised in futile supplication. Then the smoke closes over the scene like a curtain. The Berliner's iron cross is still clutched in your fist, its edges biting into your palm. You slip it into your pocket as the torpedo boat turns westward toward whatever future awaits broken men in a broken world. The Saxon murmurs something you can't hear over the engines. You lean closer, expecting a name, a regret, perhaps a prayer. Instead, he whispers the most soldier-like thing possible. Do you think they'll feed us on this ship? And suddenly you're laughing, a raw, ugly sound that startles even you. The sailors glance over nervously, as if madness might be contagious. But you can't stop. It's all so absurd. The years of frozen trenches and burning cities reduced to this single, primal question about food. The laughter turns to coughing, then to something dangerously close to sobs. The Saxon joins in weakly, his chuckles interrupted by winces of pain. The boat surges forward, its bow slicing through the waves. Behind you, the eastern sky glows with the fires you're leaving behind. Ahead lies open sea, and beyond it, somewhere in the gathering dark, the war's end, whatever shape that may take. You close your eyes against the spray, the Berliner's metal warm in your pocket, the Saxon's breathing steady beside you. The siege is over. The war is over. All that remains is the long voyage home.